Well, hello friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS office hours. It is Friday, and amazingly, YouTube thinks that we should start the stream with an ad. That's a first. But we're not going to do that. So, it is Friday, and it is time once again for the usual office hours. If it's your first time here, we just talk about SerenityOS and the related projects. And you can ask anything you want in the chat, and then we will look into it. I'm having a really unusual week. And I guess it started because I started going on walks in the morning, and that put me into this totally different headspace every day. And I've been doing some interesting things because of that. So one thing that I have been doing, for example, let me show you that before. I'm just going to hurry up before anybody asks anything. I forget how to get there. Projects. No, that's not how you get there. There it is. Right. So I have made a GitHub project board for Ladybird, so that we can track feature level issues, because we had a whole bunch of feature level work that needs to be done, but it's not really documented anywhere. So I thought, hey, wouldn't it be nice if these things didn't just live in my head and in the head of other people, but we could actually start collecting things that we know we need to do. So this is kind of a first attempt to do stuff like that, and as you can see, two things are in progress. Linus and I have assigned ourselves to some things. We'll see how it goes, but thought it would be nice to try something new, because there's a whole lot of stuff that we need to do for the browser, and introducing the foreign concept of a plan, says Sufi Bros. No, this is definitely not a plan, obviously, because there is no timeline attached, and there is no expectation that anybody will do any of these things. My only expectation is that I will do things myself, and whatever other people participate and do, that's up to them. But if you think of that as a plan, then I wonder how your actual planned things are going in your life. Let's see. Mr. FileShare said, yo, why does the parser code doesn't have spaces or tabs? I don't really understand the question. What parser code does not have spaces or tabs? You're going to have to be a bit more specific. And hello, Jeja, Sam, Simon, Christopher, Nicholas, everybody, by the way. Let's see. Jeja said, getting used to the office life. Luckily, my colleague Janil doesn't mind me streaming office hours while we work. Hey, that's nice. What's up, Janil? Glad to hear you don't mind the office hours. This is assuming you're on speaker. Otherwise, you can't hear me. But that's cool. Yes, Mr. FileShare clarifies by saying the rect language code MB. The what now? Also, why is this popping up when I click on things? All right. So what do we talk about today? Well, I don't know. We're gonna have to wait for people to ask something that I can understand. Yacht, why does the Yacht parser not have space or tabs? Because, you mean like, why does the parser not care about spaces or tabs? Because those have already been collapsed in the lexing stage. So the lexer ignores the white space unless it has some importance, like if you have white space inside of a string literal or white space inside of a comment, obviously you have to preserve that. But white space in between tokens, there's no need to preserve that because it has no semantic meaning in the program. So we just throw it away. And that makes it easier to write the parser, right? Because you don't have to stop in between every token and ignore whitespace. That is why the parser does not care about whitespace. Man, I was I just came back from the like the city recycling plant, and I was worried I wasn't gonna make it back in time, but I just barely did. Shivendra says, "What is your opinion about ChatGPT?" Well, I've played with it quite a lot, and I think it is very cool, and I think it is like unclear where that will eventually lead, but the various use cases, even things that are new yesterday with the plugins and everything, I think there are some really, really interesting developments. And I'm watching the space with curiosity and optimism. I think I'm really interested in what it can do for programmers, obviously, and for programming tools. Like, what can we do to improve our tools? Because I think programming tools have a tendency to improve year over year, and they have ever since programming was invented. Like, so programmers are used to tools improving all the time, and I'm kind of thinking of this new technology as just a continuation of that trend. It's like, okay, so now we get cooler tools and better tools, and we can write better software. So I am excited about that. And obviously, I also recognize that it produces nonsense sometimes, but I think with any technology, like, it starts out clumsy and then it gets better over time, just like the software that we write for SerenityOS. So I have cautious optimism, I guess. Let's see. Ryan says, do you feel like there's anything missing from Yuct that would dramatically improve and usability of the language inside the OS? Sure, there are various things that are missing from the language from a usability perspective. In particular, the debugging story right now is pretty bad because we transpile Yuct to C++, and we don't retain any of the information about, like, line numbers, for example, in the original Yuct source code. So if you run GDB on a Yuct program that you've compiled and it crashes somewhere, or like it panics somewhere, then you get like line number for the crash that refers to the CPP file that we transpiled to. And then you have to go and like dig through that generated code and find the thing and try to correlate that to the original Yuct source code. And that is very unergonomic. It would be very good to improve that story so that there's a preprocessor macro you can do. You can emit to say, like, oh, this actually corresponds to this line in this other file. It's I forget exactly what it's called. It's like #line or something like that. We do have LineInfo. Okay, am I just not paying attention? Thanks, Ali. When was that added? Let me see. How does that look? Where's the LineInfo? How is it supposed to derive LineInfo from this? Do I have to compile it with some option or something? Because this clearly doesn't have LineInfo. Okay, that just shows how aware I am. LineInfo, is that a thing? Debug statement spans? That's the one. You need to pass -D. Well, I didn't know that. Thank you, Ali. That's great. That should probably be the standard option. And if you don't want them, there should be an option for excluding them. But that's awesome that we have that. Okay. Well, there are many other things as well. They could be better. It could be a lot better about compile times. We have made great strides, but there are still strides to be made. And there are still things in C++ that you can't express in Yacht. Things that we make use of in Serenity, like nested structs, nested enums. Yacht has no way to conceptualize those at the moment, so that doesn't work. And also mutable types is a big issue that we're missing. So that will be, all of those things are things that we need to add. And I was working on mutable types just this morning. So we are moving forward. Simon said, ChatGPT really helps when learning new programming language. This week at work, I needed to write some XSLT. Not everything it said was correct, but it was still really helpful. Right. Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like, not everything it says is correct, but that's not that much different from like a sleepy coworker who knows a lot of stuff, but is maybe like a little distracted or confused sometimes. You can still get a ton of valuable information and context clues about like what to Google and things to investigate. And the fact that you can just engage with ChatGPT and it just responds right away, there's like no friction to interact with it. I think that's a really interesting combination of circumstances. Let's see. Joel Peterson says, "Hey Andreas, hope you had a good week." I guess I did. Thank you for saying that. You too, by the way. Joel asks, "I was curious if there's any meaningful speed up for browsers when utilizing hardware accelerated graphics for things other than WebGL." Sure. Absolutely. So one of the most impactful things that we can do, with hardware accelerated graphics would be to put the web content into layers, and then instead of re-rendering when you scroll, we could just move that layer up and down in some kind of a hardware accelerated scene graph kind of thing. So today, the way our browser works is that we just, if you scroll like this, we will just re-render, repaint every dang pixel over and over and over. And it would be much nicer if this would just be some layer with a texture on it. And if you're scrolling, we don't need to repaint anything. We just move the layer up and down. And that is actually one of the items here in the to-do list. Compositing-based painting model. That would be a very, very cool thing to start building. And it's kind of tricky because there are a ton of web features that it needs to support, like fixed positioning and clipping to shapes and all kinds of stuff. But, other browsers have done it, and we can do it too. Of course, it's a little bit unclear, like what's the best strategy for building something platform agnostic. We don't have hardware acceleration on SerenityOS yet, so we want to build this in kind of a way that doesn't make the browser significantly worse in a non-accelerated context, but it's still like architecturally conducive to acceleration, which today it is not really conducive to acceleration. And outside of that, outside of like scrolling and making stuff like that fast, you can also use hardware acceleration for various other things. Like I've seen, vector graphics rendering on GPU. I think Skia, which is the Chromium 2D graphics backend, uses GPU acceleration for like basically all the 2D graphics. So I think there's a ton of stuff you can do. We just haven't even began to poke at that yet. Let's see. Rallius said, "Wait, I'm online in time for this to be live? It certainly appears so." Welcome to the live edition of Office Hours. And Kareem says, hello, friends. Hello to you, too. Yeah, on the topic of hardware acceleration of graphics, I think what we really want to do is we want to build something kind of similar to core animation in the Apple platforms. So kind of a generalized layer stack framework or layer graph framework, which isn't bound to any specific GPU vendor or anything like that, and something that you could also do a software rendering backend for. And then if we build something like core animation, we can then put our web stack on top of that, and then it would have a backend for GPU acceleration when that is available. I think core animation is a great abstraction layer on the Apple platforms, and I think we can do something very similar to great success, I think. It is one of many things that would be awesome to do. Let's see. Ali is excited by the idea of a scene graph, huh? Scene graph. Yeah. I've never built one. I've only used them, but how hard can it be, right? Mr. Finalist Share said, any plans for making Yacht a scripting language just like Bash? So Yacht already has a REPL, but it's not really suited for a scripting language because it's not really meant for scripting workloads, I guess. It doesn't have a... Well, why isn't it a suitable scripting language? It was just never really something that we thought about making it for. If there's a great need to use that, I guess you could conceivably use it for scripting, but I would rather see shell scripting, which we already have, and JavaScript. I would rather see those improved. And for Yacht, I'm personally more interested in focusing on it as a compiled language. But, we do have a REPL, and some people are excited about REPL things, like Ali here. And I'm sure that he will say something about scripting with Yacht within the next minute or so. Alexander says, hi, Andreas. Maybe you have any vision on how libweb process architecture might evolve. If so, maybe there is something you would do in a different way than other engines. So is there something I would do differently than other engines? With the process architecture, I'm not sure. I think... So I did write up an issue about that already, about making process per origin. So we currently have one web content process per tab, and that is great for the stability of a tab, but it's not great for like in-page stability and isolation. So we should really separate them so we have a separate web content process for every origin. And that will require a bunch of architectural changes, but I think it will be very healthy. In terms of like stuff I would do differently, I know that both WebKit and Chromium, they have a way to, like, if you end up, in order to conserve resources, they will eventually start putting separate pages into the same web content process. Just to avoid like using more memory. When I worked on WebKit or Safari, I think after you have 20 tabs open, we just start reusing existing web content processes instead of making new ones. I would just not do that. I think I would rather just make new processes. And I think Chromium has similar strategies. And that kind of strategy is also important on mobile, I guess, because on mobile, you only have so much memory, and if you don't have swap, you have to be more conservative. But I think in our case, like, that's something I would do differently. Yeah, like not try to bundle things into the same web content process, but just make new web content processes. Because then you get better separation, isolation, better responsiveness, hopefully stability, at the cost of some additional memory. And yeah, to be honest, I don't know all the details and specifics about what other browsers do with their process architecture when it comes to things like, can you, like if some process for a background tab is using a lot of CPU on some script that I can't see the result of, how can I throttle that? I know how we did it on Mac and iOS, but I don't know how Chrome does things like that. But that's definitely stuff that we should also do, like background throttling based on memory usage, CPU. Potentially also like throttling network requests in idle background tabs. But if you're interested in working on process architecture stuff, then that's definitely something that we can talk more about on Discord. Let's see. Remy says, the answer probably lies in the repo already, and I know there's probably no real roadmap, but how important is the AR64 ARM support for SerenityOS? I would say it's hard to gauge something like that, but I think it is important for the health of our kernel in particular that we see a successful port to some non-x86 architecture, because a lot of the abstractions in the kernel are just x86 turned into C++. And by porting it to some other architecture, it forces us to actually make more sane, more abstract abstractions. And I think that will just make the kernel healthier. And the kernel is possibly one of the least healthy parts of the system. So I think it is good that we have something that sort of forces the kernel to improve. How important is the support for the project? It's as important as the people working on it want it to be, I think. There are a bunch of people who have been putting in serious time, like Timon and those guys, and they're doing a great job with it, and it's exciting to see where it goes. Me personally, I have no real interest in AR64 or ARM, but maybe someday I will. Who knows? David Palmer says, dumb question time. What was the motivation behind creating Yacht? Because it would be fun is a totally valid answer. So, dang it. I actually have a post about that, but the basic motivation is to get memory safety. That is the primary goal of the language. I will drop the link here for you, David Palmer. Yeah, so the basic motivating thing for me was, we are writing this big system in a memory unsafe language that doesn't look like it's becoming memory safe anytime soon. And it is boring and tedious to debug memory safety issues. And do we really want to be doing that 10 years from now? I would rather not. So looked at the existing options and concluded that it would be the most Serenity option would be to make our own language that would be perfectly fitted to our specific use case, our specific development style, and that's where it came from. Let's see. Manuel says, hi all, I'd like to port a small app to Serenity which needs a window frame, or needs a window with frame buffer and basic keyboard mouse input. Would the Doom port be a good starting point to look at? I would rather just look at one of the simple apps that we have. But you can look at anything. It's just the ports tend to be like a little bit outdated and stale, and not necessarily written in the way that we write code these days. So I would look at some simple app within the system. Don't know exactly which one I would suggest though, but I'm sure there's some simple one that you can look at. There's the libgraphics demo app, for example. This one has a whole bunch of stuff that uses the various graphics APIs that we have. You can look at how that one is put together. Jake Simon says, Rust also memory safety language. Why not Rust? Wow, it's this question. Haven't heard that one in a while. I spent several weeks writing Rust, porting Rust to Serenity, and trying to use it as a systems language for Serenity, and concluded that it is tedious and not fun to use for the type of programs that we write. Serenity is an object-oriented GUI desktop system, and that specific niche of software is, it's like, Rust is just really not great for that. And in my view, that is the reason that you don't see a lot of desktop applications written in Rust, because they have this kind of, I don't know how best to call it. Like, it's sort of an ivory tower disdain for object-oriented programming. So they refuse to put things like inheritance and virtual dispatch with override functions and things like that into the language, and it just makes traditional OOP GUI programming really, really tedious and difficult. So for that reason, I became uninterested. I lost interest in using Rust when I saw that it would just be much harder to write the kind of programs that we write. Something like Swift is a significantly closer to our needs for Serenity, but Swift, unfortunately, is also heavily tied to various Apple libraries like Foundation, libdispatch, things like that. And I didn't want a language that forces you to also import a bunch of runtime code with it like that. That was basically the reason. Let's see. David says, thank you. I've been out of the loop on SerenityOS for a while and missed a bunch of recent developments, including Yukt. Sure. Well, welcome back. Nice to see you back here again, David. Honey says, does Serenity use separate toolchain for building kernel and userland? Does it have port of GCC or Clang? To port a compiler across operating system while using x86, does Serenity need any other thing than libc? Well, it doesn't. We have the same toolchain for kernel and userland. We have ports of GCC and Clang, yes. To port a compiler across operating system while using x86, I don't understand this question. Does it need anything other than libc? I think libc is enough, but maybe I'm not understanding the question really. Let's see. Cheshire, the Mad Argonian Khan, says, since Yukt uses automatic reference counting as its method of memory management, I wonder how it will handle retain cycles to prevent memory leaks from occurring. It handles it the same way as every ARC language does, which is you have a strong pointer in one direction and a weak in the other direction. So if you have one retaining reference, then if it wants to have a pointer back to its retainer, then that pointer needs to be weak. Andy says, I wouldn't say it's disdain, they just made different choices. When designing a programming language, when you make a decision for one thing, you close the door on the others. Yeah, sure. That's obviously true that you choose some things and it makes it harder to do others. But in this specific case, I know that the people making Rust are not fans of OOP. They have a bit of a culture around disliking it. And that's fine. They can do things their way. But I think at the end of the day, like if you want to build something that is useful for the most people, then you always end up with a hybrid paradigm language in some way. Trying to be purist, I think, is just... It works in the beginning, but over time you just end up becoming hybrid anyway. And I think in my mind, there's like no doubt that Rust will eventually add OOP and inheritance and things like that. When somebody comes along with a budget and they want to build something that is tedious to build right now, they will make that happen. But maybe not anytime soon. We'll see. That bastard over there says, would you consider shifting away from object orientation in specific performance hotspots, or would that be drifting away from the core mission? Of course, I'm willing to do very strange things in specific performance hotspots. The keyword being specific. I think object-oriented programming is great in 95% of cases where performance doesn't matter. And in the 5% of cases where performance really, really matters, you can contort yourself in awkward ways to get performance. And I think that's just standard practice. And I've never actually met object-orienting extremists that refuse to do that, or that like say that, oh, we are going to make everything OO even at the cost of performance. Like in real workplaces, or like real people writing real programs tend to not be extremists like that. They recognize that, sometimes you have to compromise on fancy architecture or nice architecture in order to squeeze performance. But I don't know, that it seems like people get so riled up about these things. And there are people who are riled up about, what was the thing recently? That's this clean code versus, I don't know what the opposing side calls itself, like data-oriented programming or whatever. And that's like, it's so sad to me when you see these groups of people who, they're all computer programmers. They love programming, and they disagree about some little detail about programming. And because of that, they become hostile with each other. And that's really strange. Because in reality, in practice, like we have to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that to get the best possible code. So I don't know. It makes me a little sad when I see people trying to convince others that you have to do everything this way or everything that way or whatever. I think the best way is always the one that is willing to pick from all different disciplines without treating them like football teams or whatever. Anyway. Let's see. Paul was saying to Honey he should check in the ports folder in the repository. Originally it used to self-compile. Right. Yeah, in the ports folder you can definitely find GCC and Clang, I think. I feel like I'm gonna get fact-checked a lot today because I haven't looked in the ports directory forever. We don't have a Clang port? Oh, we only have a Clang toolchain? We have LLVM though, right? Yeah. Oh, I thought we had a Clang port. Wow. Okay, I am not aware of what's going on in the ports tree. Cheshire says, I prefer highly efficient, high quality code that's also very expressive and requires fewer lines of code all at once. Yes, everything all at once, please. All the good things, none of the bad things, for cheap, preferably. Tim says the LLVM port contains Clang. Ooh, all right. That's great. You know, I'm almost starting to wonder if it would be sweet if we could put like a little note with these packages to say what's in them. Because like, how would I know that this has Clang? I guess I could see it here. Thomas says it's the Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea. Yes, it is very much that. That's exactly what it is. And it is very silly. Mr. Final Share says, welcome to the human society. It's a really sad person treating their jobs as an ideology. A little bit. I mean, it's good to be really excited about what you're doing. Like, we've all fallen in love with programming at some point, right? If you're here watching this stream, probably you've also had the experience of falling in love with programming. And it's exciting to meet others who are excited about programming and to make little groups and work together on stuff. But there's something particularly dark that happens sometimes when people get together, and I don't know what causes it, but sometimes people get together and they make like this strange groups around how some idea is superior to all other ideas. Or sometimes it's how some other idea is really terrible and we should all hate it. I don't know why those groups form, but they do. And programming has those groups too. And it's no good. Oli G says USB yet. USB yet. We don't have any more USB support today than we had 2 months ago, I think was the last time I saw somebody poking at USB. So there's some basic infrastructure, but I don't think anybody has hooked up a USB input device successfully yet. One of many things that are available to work on in our great system. If you would like to work on USB, we have a Discord channel called USB. And it hasn't seen activity for a while, but if you come in there and you say, hello, I would like to work on USB, I'm sure that somebody would light up and help you get started. Jason L says, have you tried JT's new shell? If so, what are your thoughts on some of the pros they do, and would any parts of it be considered for Serenity's shell? It feels like a real step up from Bash. I have tried it a bunch of times, and I never last more than a few minutes because I get frustrated that I can't do kind of the basic things that I want to do without having to relearn, like learn a new syntax. And I was talking to JT a lot about this, and they had a project for a while to adopt some like Bash-isms or whatever. Basically, like to make it easier for people to come over from Bash to new shell, they would support some Bash syntax for things that wouldn't introduce ambiguities with their own existing syntax. But I don't know how that really panned out in the end, because like the more they looked at it, the more the more problems they found with like every little thing they tried to make Bash compatible. There was some reason that it would break some new shell thing. So I don't know what happened with that. But yeah, I've tried it, and I don't know. I think it doesn't seem like it maps to what I want to do with my shell very much. But like 90% of the time when I'm using my shell, I'm just starting some process, right? And the few times that I want to do some like text processing or something like that, yeah, probably I could do that in a cleaner, more precise way with something like NuShell. But I've never been in a situation where it feels like doing it with Unix text processing tools is like holding me back from getting the result I need. I would need, I think for me, NuShell needs some kind of big explosive, here's something that you can do with NuShell that would be super tedious to do with like a basic text pipe shell. And I haven't seen that case yet. But I'm glad that people are trying. I'm glad that NuShell exists and that they're trying to like push in a different direction for a shell. I think for me personally, I would be more excited about a shell that integrates with a higher level GUI terminal, for example. And frees itself from the constraints of the the 1970s serial port terminal that we all use and love. To me, that would be the truly radical thing to explore. Let's see. Andy said, kind of feel like high school again. People of group A can't hang out with people of group B by no other measure than them belonging to different groups. Yeah, it's strange. It's like high school never really ends. You ever feel like that? Like you get out of high school and you go to jobs, but a lot of the things that were sort of a lot of the social dynamics of high school sort of continue in jobs. They're just I don't know, more older people involved, so the dynamics are a bit different, but it's the same forces at play. Joel says, I will be honest, I was sort of dragged into the tribalism. This channel pulled me out. That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. And it's super easy to get dragged into the tribalism. And I think probably everybody, if we're honest, like we get sucked into this. I've definitely been sucked into tribal thinking about programming, about specific languages or frameworks or methodologies and things outside of programming as well. But it really seems to me that the enlightened way is to step out of the tribe and look for answers for yourself instead of just accepting kind of a wholesale package of what is good, what is true. Even though it is harder to live that way, it is nicer. Anyway, that bastard over there says, I'm learning C at the moment, currently struggling to find good resources on how to handle strings. I know you've gone through a few string iterations. Any advice for the kind of trade-offs to investigate? Well, if you're using C, I can't say that I have a lot of experience dealing with C strings because I learned how to use ASCII strings in C and to some extent UTF-8 strings when some library forced me to use them, but then I just moved to C++, where I've dealt with strings in all kinds of encodings. But dealing with strings in C, I don't know what's a good resource for that. Yeah, I don't know what's a good resource for getting really good string management in C. I would look at something like maybe like GTK and seeing how they deal with strings, because GTK is a C library and they have good like international language support in the GTK applications. So I would imagine that they have some reasonable string handling architecture. Maybe look at some different libraries and see how they implement strings, because any modern library that has to print strings, like that isn't known to be English only, they're going to have to deal with other encodings, and the standard C library is very, very sparse and crappy when it comes to things like that. So I think you can find a ton of different libraries with a interesting string code. That's what I would suggest. Just look at existing libraries like GTK. The literal definition of bruh says, on the topic of people forming groups around hating ideas, giving Serenity code is quite object-oriented. Have you found the criticism from the never oop crowd to hold up in your case? So the Serenity code is heavily object-oriented, but we're not afraid to drop out of that paradigm when it is helpful. And to me, it seems like that's sort of where the never oop, the super anti-oop crowd, their criticism doesn't really work on somebody who uses oop but is perfectly happy to do things in a non-oop way where it matters for performance. And I guess the cases where the traditional like data-oriented design type thinking has valid criticism of Serenity is that we have a bunch of hot code at the moment, hot data structures that are very suboptimal in terms of memory layout. So things are packed in stupid ways that's gonna like get sprayed all over different cache lines. And if you were to reorganize the data, then we could probably get a lot faster at processing it. And the way I think about that is that OOP is a great way to stand up a lot of code and to flesh out architecture. And then you want to use a profiler to identify hot code, hotspots, hot data structures, and then apply optimization techniques, for example, through a lens of data-oriented design, where it makes sense. And for the things where it doesn't matter, you don't need to make life harder for yourself by like organizing things in an unnatural, non-object-oriented way, just because you want to please the god of data-oriented design. But I think it's a great tool it's a great way to look at things. Like, okay, so this thing is slow. Like, do I have the right data layout? Do I have the right algorithms? Those are all good questions. And yeah, that's an area where their criticism is valid of SerenityOS, is that we don't have great data layout for a lot of things. But those are things that we will eventually identify and make better over time using the techniques that they advocate. Let's see. Jason L said, what would a GUI terminal... Look, I really want to like highlight these, but it makes this menu pop up, which is so annoying. What would a GUI terminal look like in your eyes? I guess just something similar to like text messaging applications, for example. You know how you have a conversation where you go back and forth with somebody? That could be an interesting inspiration. So you would like type in some command and it would sort of respond to you or reply to you with the results. And the results could be an image or like a set of files presented as a icon view with thumbnails or whatever. The presentation could be totally dynamic and like you could even allow the user to interact with the results of commands in various custom ways. But that's sort of what I imagine. So you would just have this scrolling eternally scrolling view, like an IM conversation with back and forth between you and the system. And I've seen prototypes of things like that, but I've never seen anything production ready. And it is kind of an interesting area. We've talked about building something like that for Serenity a bunch of times, but nobody ever really picked it up and championed it as a thing that they want to do. Burak said, have you ever considered porting Raylib to Serenity? I don't think I have ever considered that. Let's see. Andy says, hot data structures in your area. Right. Hot data structures in your profile. Graham says, seeing how everything is getting AI integration, could you see Serenity Assistant getting its own AI model trained on the Serenity source code and documentation? Wouldn't that be neat? I think today, I was going to say, like, the thing that holds us back today is that we don't have hardware acceleration, so we don't know how to talk to the GPU. But I've seen those versions of like Llama or whatever it's called that run on the vector unit of a CPU, and that seems pretty cool. I think you could totally imagine a future where something like that exists, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like ready today, but maybe in the future that would be something that we could build. I feel like with AI, it's hard to guess what kind of tools we will have built on this technology like 5 years from now. Because there's new stuff coming out so often right now that sort of challenges my idea of what you can do with a computer. And it's really, really fun, I think, to be constantly exposed to things like that so often lately. We had a bit of a lull for a couple of years where, like, oh, I know what computers can do. And in these last couple of months, it's been really exciting to see that, yeah, actually computers can do more than that. So maybe there will be some really cool thing that we could build into Serenity, built on such technology. But of course, we would have to build it ourselves. So that would be an exciting project as well, figuring out how to do that. Let's see. Parachute Parrot says, that's a great name, by the way. Says, what is your opinion about doing vacation? Does it make sense to you as a concept to regain creativity, productivity, personal well-being, etc.? Absolutely. Absolutely. It makes sense to me. I think you need time away from the computer. And that's why we have things like evenings and weekends and vacations. And depending on where you are in the world, of course, vacation can be 2 weeks or it can be 5 weeks, or they come in different shapes and sizes. But I think it seems observably helpful to people to take a break from work and responsibilities for a while and just go and do something else, take their mind off it. And historically, I've been terrible at taking vacations. Whenever I was on vacation from work, I would typically, I would stop working productively, but I would still hang out on work IRC channels, or still check work email, or chat with coworkers who were at work. For some reason, I had a hard time sort of disconnecting the social aspect of work, even though I didn't produce any units of work. But as I get older, I have become way better at understanding the value of relaxation. And I think vacation is a very important part of that. Let's see. YukiCat says, I saw a program recently claim that they lay out their data in such a way that implicit SIMD can optimize common operations and that they don't use explicit SIMD for portability. How does that make it more portable if SIMD is already platform specific, so you would have to recompile it anyway? I'm guessing that what they meant is compilers these days have this thing called auto-vectorization. So it's a fairly sophisticated optimization category where the compiler will sort of detect that you're doing something that can be parallelized using SIMD instructions. And it will then like emit code that uses SIMD instructions to do the thing that you're doing more efficiently. But it should never require using any platform-specific clues to the compiler about it, as I understand it. And I think I don't remember actually how we implemented those on Serenity. Maybe we're using I was gonna say like Intel specific things, but I think maybe we're not. No. So we have like these SIMD types, for example, that you can use, like you can make essentially a vector of integers of a specific size, and then you can manipulate them, do math on them in a way that is not specific to the CPU or specific even to the CPU vendor, but just like general vector types. And the compiler can then optimize that. Although that's not necessarily auto-vectorization, I guess. Here we are still being explicit. It's just explicit in a platform agnostic way. Auto-vectorization, as I understand it, just detects vector-friendly patterns, even if you didn't say vector this, vector that. But I'm not completely sure about that because I am not a compiler hacker, so I don't exactly know how those things work. Let's see. Federico said, did you try CoPilot or CoPilot X during your coding sessions? What do you think about AI in programming as assisted? I think it's a very interesting idea, and I have CoPilot here installed, actually. I installed it yesterday, and I was trying it out to see if it could tell me what is the best animal. The best animal is the dog? No. Previously it was telling me cat dog. Now it's saying dog. Ah, you liar. The cutest animal is... okay, well, it's confused. Somehow previously it was telling me the cat dog is the cutest animal, which is obviously true. So yeah, I have CoPilot installed. I was messing with it since yesterday, and I would say it's very clumsy, but sometimes it can really save you a bunch of typing when it guesses exactly what you want to do accurately. But it feels like it's maybe like 20% of the time that it guesses what I want to do, and the rest of the time I just get this big completion suggestion that doesn't really make sense or doesn't exactly fit what I'm trying to do. But this is the first version of CoPilot, so it's not CoPilot X. And I think, again, like, yes, these tools are clumsy now, but I think given time, refinement, more development, they're going to become quite sophisticated and quite smart, quite good at this. And it seems like it would be foolish to ignore such a potentially huge productivity boost that you could get from a tool like this if it ends up working like really, really well. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm kind of just monitoring curiously the development of all these things. I'm not sold on it yet. And maybe it turns out that like it's not possible to get really, really good because you hit some wall where like the computation required to get better requires like way more hardware than is practically affordable. We'll see. But it's cool. Let's see. Paul Rat says cat dog is definitely the SerenityOS animal of choice, along with a ladybug. Right. That is right. Those are the official animals. Well, the cat dog, the ladybug, and the yak, of course. HPQOEU says, would it not be useful for boilerplate? It would be useful for boilerplate if it would guess the type of boilerplate that I want to write. I've noticed that it's not really reliable to, it doesn't do exactly what I want. So I still end up having to go through it and like, I have to edit and fix up and find little mistakes. So at this stage, I feel like by using it, you're just like copy pasting code that has a bunch of bugs, and then you have to go and find those bugs. And it seems easier to me at this moment to just write the code yourself instead of like just press button to get code and then you have to sit and look for the bugs. I'd rather write the bugs myself and then have to find them. Anyway. Oh, hey, it's 5:06, so I have to go. But we will end the stream here. Thank you all for coming to office hours. I really appreciate the questions and the chatter. I hope everybody will have a great weekend. If you end up programming, then if it's Serenity related, come hang out on Discord and we'll talk about it. And if you don't work on Serenity related stuff, then best of luck. And see if you can find somebody to work with anyway, because it is more fun to do programming with friends. Anyways, thanks for coming, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.